New book is a call to action: women, religion, violence and power. So as I said before the break, a potent cocktail there: women, religion, violence and power. What is the theme here of this book?
The theme is that the most serious and unaddressed human rights abuses on earth is the abuse of women and girls in the United States, in Europe, and in all the other rest of the world. And this has been growing, and it's very similar to the racial discrimination I knew when I was a boy living on the farm, when the same thing happened just to black people, particularly in the South and some other parts of the world. And the white people deplored it, but they didn't do anything about it, most of them, because it really was beneficial to them to be given the best jobs and the best education and all the advantages over our black neighbors. And the same thing is happening now with women around the world. And in our American universities, there's horrible sexual violence. Very seldom reported. Only 4% of the rapes on college campuses are reported because the presidents of the colleges and so forth don't want the college to get a bad reputation for sexual attacks. The same thing happens in the U.S. military. As you know, it was reported by the military itself that 26,000 women were sexually abused in 2012, and only 1% of them or so resulted in any punishment of the rapist. And the problem is that on university campuses and in the military, the rapists are serial rapists. Quite often it's the same man over and over who discovers that he can't be punished. And this happens in America. Also in the United States, women get about 23% less pay than men for the same job. The Fortune 500 companies, only less than 24 of them are women, the CEOs, and they get 42% less pay than men. So this is a pervasive thing in the United States, and if it's bad in our country with these three admired institutions, that is the corporations and the military and the universities, how much more bad it is, how much worse it is in countries where there's not very much respect for law and order.
So how do we change this? I mean, in the end, it'll come down to leaders, individuals. They're going to have to make a big difference.
It will.
How important is, for example, somebody like the new Pope, the new head of the Catholic Church, in terms of changing opinion and values of great institutions?
Well, I like and admire the Pope very much. When John Paul II, the Pope, was over in America, he spent a good bit of time with me at the White House, yes, he and I. And I brought this subject up, but I very quickly found that he was inflexible on anything that related to abortion or using contraceptives or women's rights. But I think that Pope Francis is quite different. I wrote him a letter after I started writing my book. I summarized briefly the points in the book and asked him to help me with some of the elements of women and girls' abuse. And I didn't demand that he make women instantly priests. I know that would be hard to do. And he wrote me a very nice letter back and said that he saw a need for greatly increased role for women to play in the Catholic Church. And I was very pleasantly surprised last week when he appointed an 8-person committee to look at abuse of children by priests. And 4 of those are women. One of them, by the way, is a woman who was abused as a child when she was in a convent and a priest abused her. So I think that Pope Francis will go as far as he can within the strict and kind of unmovable Catholic policies to do that. But I have problems too with some of the Christian denominations, my own. I was very active in the Southern Baptist Convention for almost 70 years. And then our church took a similar action toward women all of a sudden in the year 2000. It said that women had to be subservient to their husbands, and that no woman could serve as a pastor of a church or as a deacon or as a chaplain in the army, and even said that in some of the seminaries of a Baptist church that a woman couldn't teach a class if it had a boy student in it. Things of that kind. And my wife and I left the Southern Baptist Convention, and now we're very active in a more moderate
Having had the pleasure of meeting your wife several times, I couldn't imagine her ever being subservient to you, Mr. President.
Well, that's true. I can't either. No, I can't. But you know, the fact is that Jesus Christ, whom I worship, he never took any action that wasn't actually even for men and women, or even exalted women above men. And he treated women in a very generous and constructive and personal way that had never been done in history before he came. Unfortunately, some of the interpretations of St. Paul afterwards, who's really the theologian for the Protestants and for Christians now, his writings can be interpreted both ways. If you're a male leader of a church, you can find scripture verses in the Bible that support your position that women ought not to be priests or ought not to teach boys in school and things like that. But Paul also was very progressive in mirroring what Jesus said. He said that there's no difference in the eyes of God between a woman and a man, or between a slave and a master, or between a Jew and a Gentile. And he also listed a whole bunch of about 25 of the preeminent leaders in the earliest Christian church. A good portion of them are women by name.
Do you ever think you'll slow down, Mr. President? I mean, quite extraordinary. You're still churning out these fabulous books. You're doing massive media tours. You don't look like a day over about 65.
Well, that's a nice thing to say.
You're bursting with energy. You remember everything that's ever happened to you.
Well, this is very important to me. And my hope is that in the future, the Carter Center can be kind of the center of anyone on earth that wants to correct this horrible abuse of women and girls. And at the end of the book, I list 23 different things that we can do to address every issue, like genital mutilation of girls. For instance, I go to Egypt often, on even modern days, and over 90% of the women in Egypt have had their genitals cut when they were children. And in some countries, it's even higher percentage than that, for instance. And there are honor killings in the world where girls who are raped are killed by her mother and father and her younger brother. If he's under 17, he might get a juvenile sentence. These kind of things still go on in a very broad way. In fact, in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, year before last, there were over 2,500 honor killings reported.
Right. That's a huge problem.
It is, and this is done much more in some other countries. So this is the kind of thing that hurts me. You know, I think the worst thing that people don't know is that at this moment, there are about 160 million, think about that figure for a while, women and girls missing from the face of the earth who were murdered, strangled when they were born because it was a girl baby. And now, since the advent of sonograms, they find out that the fetus is a female and they selectively abort a fetus so a girl baby won't be born. And this is when the family doesn't have enough food to feed a lot of children and they want just boys, or when countries like India or China puts a limit on the size of families.
Mr. President, it's thought-provoking stuff. It's called A Call to Action, Women, Religion, Violence and Power. Great to see you.